few weeks, I talked about our triune God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So today I got a question for y'all. Where do you look for God?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Any other? She kind of covered it all, but you know. You know, Adam and Eve walked with God in the garden. An outdoor spot and a place of plenty. Candy's got one of those green thumbs. I mean, she can grow anything, pretty much anything she wants. If you come by our house, she's probably going to give you some flowers out of the garden, and she makes me walk around the neighborhood a couple times a day, and really I know what she's doing. She's checking her flowers behind the back building, and she's checking everything else. She doesn't grow anything you can eat. I'm trying to do that, but that's not very good at it. But we can go out and if you know what you're looking for, we probably wouldn't have to plant anything at all. There's just an abundance out there. It took me a while to figure out, but my neighbor's got a tree, and it almost grows horizontally because it's coming out of the stump of what used to be a bigger tree, and that's a mulberry tree. And I remember when I was growing up that there were real small mulberry trees around where I live, and I could just eat them all day. When we lived in Oklahoma, Candy had a blackberry patch in her backyard up in New Hampshire, and we decided we would like some blackberries, but we didn't really want to put up with the thorns. Anybody here ever picked blackberries? Yeah, you got to leave a blood offering when you get those, right? Well, we got thornless blackberries, and everybody told us you can't eat those just off the bush. You got to put them in a cobbler or something like that because they're too bitter. They forgot to tell Trinity and Trevor. They were just gobbling them. Just as quick as they got dark, they were gobbling them. We've got dozens of kind of mushrooms, we've got nuts, we've got everything else, and besides that, there's plenty of meat to put on the table. God's blessing is there. You know, the people comment on River Road. If you go from 202 up to English, River Road gets kind of rough, doesn't it? Do you ever notice, though, the good thing about River Road being rough is you have to slow down. And you get to look at some of the open fields. You get to be right there in the hills. And at some point, you're right there on the river. And you get to see the blessings and the beauty. And then when you get down on what we used to call the flats, and look and see those hills. And in the winter they look kind of bare. Sometimes they're kind of white. Then in the spring you get that light green just as the buds are starting to come out. Then you get a multitude of greens during the summer. The pines and cedars are that dark green, and the rich greens of the maples and the oaks. And mixed in there, we get the flowering things, and I guess every kind of flowering bush, we have a winter for it every spring. The locust, the redbud, the dogwood. I don't know how many of you have ever got to drive out west. My dad was one who I got my love for driving from him. And when he had the opportunity, we would pull a Nimrod fold-up camping trailer out, and we got to Colorado, and we looked out, and we started seeing the Rocky Mountains, and they just had that little bit of look to them. And we said, okay, we're going to be there in an hour or so. It was 8 hours before we finally got to the Rockies. So big, so magnificent. That's where you can really look for God, because He created all of that. He was there. Adam and Eve were in the garden. Moses was out tending flocks. And God called him into His service in a very personal way out where there were no cities, no towns. And it was just a quiet time between him and God. You ever been out far enough in the woods or in the fields that there was no distraction at all? You couldn't hear any traffic. No planes buzzing by. It's just you. And you realize that every breath you're taking is a blessing. You look around, and you know God's in this place, and you can almost hear Him talking to you. And sometimes you go out by yourself, and you aren't on real good terms with God. Maybe you've recently lost somebody. Maybe you've recently had a diagnosis that scared you. And you just want to say, why me, God? Why me? Jacob. What was someone who was wrestling with God and didn't know why different things had happened in his life. Now, he was what we would call sin. He pulled some shenanigans in his life. But he also had stayed on a pretty good term with God. And one night, he stayed on one side of the river, and he sent all of his family, all of his servants, all of his cattle, his camels, everything, over on the other side, and he's going to catch up with them the next day. And that night, he got in a wrestling match. And it doesn't say it was a dream, it just says someone came and wrestled with him all night. And he's wondering, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? And at the end of it, and I talked about this before, the guy said, the sun's coming up, I'm leaving. And he just held on to him and said, tell me your name. Tell me who I've been wrestling with. And he refused to answer. Give me a blessing. And the person asked him, what's your name? He said, Jacob. He said, I give you a new name. Israel. One who wrestled with God. These were all situations way out there. Now Moses got his first commission from a burning bush out in the wilderness. But then when he went to speak with God, he went on the top of a mountain. Very few of the other Israelites were even allowed to come onto the mountain, but he went to the very top and spoke with God. We see people looking for God in the wilderness, in the expanse of creation. Back in the 1960s, the very, very first part of the 60s, and there was a space race going on. And the Russians beat us to having a man in space. And I forget the name of the cosmonaut, but he was the first man ever to orbit the Earth. And when he came back, he said, I've been to space, and I've looked all around, and I didn't find God any place. And this was such a banner for the atheistic community, both in Russia and in America. Wasn't long later, a guy named John Glenn was the first American in space. And he got to go around 3 times. So we kind of whooped him on the length of it. And when he got back, he said, I've been to space. And I've looked at the expanse of it. And I've looked at all there was to see. And I saw God every place. If you're looking for God, you can find him. When we look at Jesus, Jesus was God incarnate. And he traveled around, went to where the people were. He went to the villages. He went to the towns. He went to the cities. He preached the gospel. He preached the good news that God does love you. He holds you accountable. You know, we've got a couple of young people in here that are probably reaching a certain stage in their life where they're ready to be a little bit rebellious. And mom and dad, especially dads, are going to have to rein them in here and there. And some of them are going to be a little bit, going to be a little bit stronger rein than others. So Jesus said, yes, I love you, but you will be accountable. I will bless you. And he showed his power through healing. He healed the lepers. He healed the blind. He healed the mute. He healed the crippled. He even brought a couple people back from death. He showed his power. And when we look for Jesus, we look for the Gospels. 4 different authors. They gave, and they're attributed to, or 3 of them are attributed to people who walked with him. and then there was another one who was a Gentile. He was one of us, not a non-Jewish, but he took notes. He witnessed a lot of it himself. He also talked to eyewitnesses to the other things and gave us the Gospel of Luke. When you want to look at the testimony of who Jesus really is, that's where you look. You'll have a lot of people tell you this and that and all this, and then you ask them, well, where is that written? Where was that? And they don't know, and they don't even know about the Gospels other than there's nothing really there. That's just an old corrupt book. But the reality is there's more evidence for the biblical text than any other first century writing. And we see God's personal presence with us. So we can find God, the evidence for God, and the actual testimony to God out in the woods, but we can also find it in the writing of the Gospels. It's such a great time. I'm blessed right now. We have a back porch. And I can sit outside and read the scriptures. But then, there's that third person of the Trinity, the person that almost gets forgotten, the Holy Spirit of God. Instead of me going after the woods, he comes to me, wherever I am. He comes to you also. Instead of just being written about, he's still alive and at work today. As a counselor, a comforter, an encourager. When we heard the readings today from Acts, when they were choosing the people to serve other people, it wasn't that the apostles were too good for the work. It was just there was too much of it that they couldn't do that and spread the gospel. So they found people to do it. And you know what the requirement was? They must be full of the Holy Spirit of God. They must have evidence that Spirit dwells within them. There's a question that get asked once in a while. If you were accused of being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? And I'll ask, if you believe in the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, that God actually wants to dwell within you and commune with your soul and guide you and encourage you and comfort you in all things, would there be enough evidence that you take time to do that? You know, when I spoke of seeking God, I talked about physical locations. When I talked about wanting to know about Jesus, I talked about physical reading of the Gospels. But the Holy Spirit is a whole different experience. I don't care where you are. I don't care who you are. He is seeking you. He is desiring and wanting to commune with you, to dwell in you. to guide you. God the Father is great and wonderful creator of all things. Jesus is the witness of God, from God, of God, is God. And we have the writings of all that he did. The Holy Spirit, though, is when he left, as we read in Acts, the Spirit will come. And then when he came, he blessed them and allowed them to speak to people in their own tongues. I did not have that blessing of languages, but I have at times been able to make myself understood with people that speak quite differently than I do. We need to understand, as I spoke of the gifts of the Spirit recently, each of us has a different gift that the Holy Spirit will reveal to us. And we will be able to minister in that way. It might be working with our hands and being able to do repair work with somebody. It might be able to counsel somebody in a particular thing you've already experienced in your life, and you can help them in their lives. Some people are gifted with that gift of healing, and I'm not talking about just doctors. I'm talking about people who can minister to you and heal you in body or mind, or even in your spirit. Realize that God did not create the world and then abandon it.